Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ursula DeBerry, and my sign name is U on the chin here. I am the director for the governor's office for the deaf and hard of hearing in the state of Maryland. I do have some people from my team here as well if they want to pull up their videos just to say hi quickly. So I have Diamond, I believe. And Diamond saying, "Hi, everyone. My name is Diamond. I am the administrative assistant for ODAHH here in Maryland." Thank you. Now we have our second interpreter here joining, and we'll let the next person introduce themselves.
Tanea Brown. Yep, interpreter manager here. Nice to meet you.
Wonderful. Thank you to Tanea for introducing yourself. So now I'm going to ask Diamond, because she's going to be helping with the PowerPoint, to go ahead and start sharing the screen for the PowerPoint. Can everyone see the screen okay? Okay, so I'm going to ask if you're not speaking, if you can take your video off screen. And then if you do have any questions, you'll be able to ask at the end of the presentation. And so go ahead and just take a note of the questions you'd like to ask at the end. I'd like to just have the interpreter who's voicing and myself on the screen, if you don't mind. Thank you, everyone. So I'll go to the next slide, please. And let's talk about our agenda quick. Okay, so on our agenda, we're going to be talking about first who I am, Ursula, related to the related to deaf culture in general. I will also be talking about our Governor's Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, our mission and our vision that ties in very closely to deaf culture and why we're here. Then I'd like to mention a little bit about the different terminology that comes up. And so I will share a lot of that information with you as well, related to deaf culture again, of course. And then I'd like to give you a little bit of tips and tricks for your office as well. What you all can be doing when you are working with a deaf person in your office. And then at the very end, we will have time for a Q&A. In between some of this, I will also have some short videos I will be showing. So this recording will also be available later on as well on the website for anybody who might be interested that is an employee. They can watch this video later. So each slide, I will do my best to just give a quick summary in about 1 to 2 minutes. Because this is only about a 50-minute presentation, I'd like to leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end for Q&A and wrap up. So next slide, please. One thing about the slides too is I always like to do this ahead of time. For deaf people, they like to be able to read this PowerPoint slide before I go ahead and start lecturing about it. So that's something that you can also do, is just give folks a moment to read the slide. Even just 10 seconds is enough, and then it's good to go ahead and begin. So yes, I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. Uh, Briefly, I lived there until moving to Wadesboro, North Carolina, about 30 miles away from Charlotte. So I was born profoundly deaf. I grew up learning the oral method, and I did not learn sign until later in life. I was about 10 years old when I learned sign. Prior to that, my family did not know that I was deaf, in fact. My parents knew that something was a little bit unique about me because oftentimes when they tried to call me and get my attention, I would not respond to my family. And some of them even thought that I was just blatantly ignoring them and not listening to them. However, when I got into kindergarten, there, I learned at the school about, I was at the Waynesboro Elementary School at that time, and they gave out an assessment to all the students going into kindergarten and first grade. So that assessment was partially a hearing test. So they grouped up all the students, and then at that time, there was no hearing screening being administered when a baby was born. And so when we got the results from that school, that is when my family found out that would need further testing. And so we took a trip to Charlotte, North Carolina, in order to do so. So when we got to Charlotte, it was there that the doctors did inform my family that Ursula cannot hear. She's deaf. And that was the first time I learned from that experience that, I was a person with hearing loss, and that was my first exposure for my family. So my experience growing up in deaf culture is actually very different than a lot of others that grow up in deaf culture. For me, I was honestly more about surviving and navigating the experience as a deaf person. When I moved to Delaware, I went to a school in Delaware again called Cape Heldon, and that is in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And at that time, it was explained to my family about a deaf school that was in Delaware. And so we ended up moving closer to that deaf school in Newark, Delaware. And so I attended this Delaware School for the Deaf. And that is when I finally immersed myself in deaf culture and being in a deaf school and gained that experience. I lived in the dorms, and my family also moved closer to the school to be closer to me. Next slide, please. So for the Governor's Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, we represent the Governor of Maryland, and his goal is as follows: to promote equal and full access for all Marylanders. So we want to be able to provide the expertise as well as encourage general welfare for our Maryland deaf, blind, and hard of hearing populations throughout the state of Maryland. Their health, their peace, their safety, and their access is top priority. We want these individuals to feel that they can work and communicate in the community. This also serves as a reminder to all of us. Next slide, please. So, as far as our vision here, all Maryland citizens who are deaf and hard of hearing, deaf blind as well, will have equal and full access to the resources, services, and opportunities for participation in all aspects of the community life in Maryland. So that is what we strive for, and that is our vision. Next slide. So this number researched 1.2 million deaf or hard of hearing Marylanders. That information is taken from Johns Hopkins. and research they conducted. So this study focused on the number of deaf people residing in the state of Maryland. Now, as far as the US census, 48.1 million Americans identify as deaf or hard of hearing of all ages. So this is from 12 years old and up. They identify deaf or hard of hearing, at least 1 ear experiencing hearing loss. It's also 30 million Americans age 12 and older that are deaf and hard of hearing in both ears and identify as that way. So that statistical data is taken from the year 2016. And so from that information is taken from their findings. Now we're going to go ahead and pivot and talk about Maryland, this 1.2 million age 12 and older who identify as deaf or hard of hearing in at least 1 ear. That means that we are talking about 759,000 Marylanders. So just to give you that number, that way you're able to better envision. Uh, I'm curious how to have that data to discuss and share. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Next slide, please. So let's talk about what it means to be deaf and how we define that. Is there such a thing, and how do we define that? So we know that word has a cultural meaning, a cultural connotation, and specifically, what does deaf culture mean? So shared values, beliefs, social norms, and artistic expressions, as well as the traditions of individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, and those that primarily use sign language to communicate. So deaf culture is a vibrant community with its own language, like ASL, and also has its own unique worldview that oftentimes emphasizes the visual. So we'll talk about what it means to make language visual. Hawkins, in a 2019 article, shared that deaf culture describes the social beliefs, behaviors, art, literary traditions, history, values, and shared institutions of communities that are affected by deafness and also, or hearing loss in general, and in which sign language is used as the main means of communication. So we are aware that some deaf individuals do not use sign language. And so the definition might evolve a little bit over time for those. And we're going to actually switch interpreters while we go to the next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about identity and the terminology that comes with that, with deaf culture. So for the first one, we're going to talk about identity. Sometimes we find the deaf identity doesn't come until later in life, depending on their journey and their experiences that they go through with their own identity and finding that they are deaf or they become, deafen later in life or hard of hearing and how they identify with that role. So the deaf culture is built on a sense of shared identity among individuals who have a significant hearing loss and rely on sign language. And many times, like you said, there's those who sign and don't for communication purposes. All right, next slide, please. Sign language. Yep. So sign language is the cornerstone of deaf culture, providing a visual and spatial means of communication and self-expression. So that's a very important part of deaf culture, language. All right, next slide, please. Visual orientation. Part of being deaf cultures, as being deaf individuals, is often having a heightened awareness of their surroundings and rely heavily on visual cues for communication and interaction. So having eye contact or being deaf-blind and having that visual contact and tactical, knowing what's going on in the background setting. That's part of the visual cues that are so important to us. That also means that facial expressions are also important to us. So if you're happy, you need to show it. If you're sad, you need to show it. If you don't show it, then you can't feel it. That's why when you meet a deaf-blind person, you always say happy to touch you. Next slide, please. Deaf pride. That word, deaf pride, wow, it's widespread within our community. There's a lot of deaf who include that deaf blind, deaf hard of hearing, latent deaf that use that term. And we have deaf pride, especially as a form of communication. So many individuals within the deaf culture embrace their deafness as a cultural identity, celebrating their language and heritage, and rather than viewing it as a disability. So it's deaf pride. We do have that. And we celebrate being disabled as a deaf person with deaf pride and know that we have our culture. Thank you. Next slide, please. Expression. Let me show you the video. That little girl was sharing her story using numbers and facial expressions to exaggerate the numbers. And that's part of deaf culture and deaf identity. It's artistic, how we express expressions like deaf art, literature, and storytelling, often exploring themes related to deaf experience and identity. So that girl was using numbers to relate to a story. You have an opportunity later to watch that video again, take a closer look to see how she used the numbers to incorporate and share the story and move the story along. Yeah, and it's all about recycling. Next slide, please. Community. I think community is really for any culture. The deaf community provides a sense of belonging and support for its members who may have faced marginalization or lack of access in the hearing world. So that's when we see each other, we immediately connect with each other, regardless of where we are out in the community. We could be at the airport, we could be, at a gas station, anywhere out in the community. We see another deaf person, we automatically connect to them. Hey, hi, oh, you're deaf, I'm deaf. And it's basically, oh, where are you from? Getting to know each other. And we're from all over. But as soon as we see each other, we get their names, it's just part of our community. And sometimes, if the sign language is a little bit different, so maybe like it's more signed English or like for another country, Japanese sign language, we can still understand each other. And that's what the use of gestures. It's a visual language, and that's what we cherish. Next slide, please. Behaviors, what we see. Deaf culture has its own norms and behaviors, such as specific ways of getting someone's attention, like eye contact or shoulder tapping. It's very important to recognize and understand the behaviors that are different and how we get other people's attentions. You'll see more about that in the presentation. Next slide, please. Not a one size fits all. So just like different tips and tricks at the end, the person should be viewed as an individual and what best fits their identity and how they prefer to communicate and how they prefer to be addressed. It's important to note that not all deaf people with hearing loss identify with deaf culture. Some may prefer to be identified as hard of hearing or may not be actively involved in the deaf community, and that's okay. Next slide, please. So this is greetings. Greetings. I put a picture here because with greetings, it varies. We have a person moving face to face, taking eye contact. It could be as simple as, texting each other as well. Or, like flashing a light, stopping on the ground, getting someone's attention, hitting the table. There's various ways to get people's attention for greetings in deaf culture. Hello, pretty standard, right? But it's important with eye contact, or if we're, using tactical to get the touch. Which brings us to our next slide, eye contact. See the pictures there with eye contact and deaf etiquette. So what should you be doing? So you give the deaf person awareness. Yep, I'm hearing. I know sign language a little bit, right? Not proficient, but that's all right. Pointing is normal. That's fine. I know some people say it's rude to point, but in our deaf culture, it's acceptable to point, to show what we're talking about, and different ways to get a deaf person's attention, as you can see here, tapping. So, yep, you're allowed to tap on the shoulder. Don't smack them too hard. But yeah, if it's also an emergency, you might need to, double tap or, but make sure it's soft enough where it's pretty standard, it's acceptable. Same thing with deaf blind as well for tactile. Some people can also see lights, so you can do a flashing light system as well, if that works as well, if you have that. Again, don't shout at a deaf person. That's not helpful. And so just like you're driving away and you see something and you're honking, right? That doesn't really effective, right? It's just a way to get people's attention. Yeah. Next slide, please. So we discussed briefly about this. We talked about eye contact, right? That's important. Get their attention. Make sure they're looking at you. And just to make sure the background is also not like bright. So like you're not backlit. So it's hard to see the person to make sure, that it's very clear. Maybe move away from a background that's backlit or sunlight. Anything to make sure there's no glare and it's clear communication. You can see each other. Yep. It's always important to make sure you have that. Also, when you're walking, make sure you can see each other back and forth, and you're looking out for each other. But again, eye contact's first and foremost. Next slide, please. All right, and we'll watch a video here about making eye contact.
That video did a great job explaining about eye contact and why it is so important to the deaf community, especially for deaf adults as we're teaching our children and disciplining them, and also with teachers when they're teaching deaf students or just any hearing person working with a deaf individual. Eye contact is so important to communication. So you might see this happen oftentimes, as hearing people might plug their ears to not listen. That also happens to be the case for deaf children. So again, eye contact is so important to deaf culture. Later on, you realize that as an adult, it could be rude not making eye contact in our culture. It can evoke a sense of ignoring the person. And so, anytime you're chatting with a deaf person, you should be looking at them. Looking away, not sharing that eye gaze, makes it harder for a deaf person to know if you're even talking to them or talking to someone else in the room. So, it's very important to maintain that eye contact, even if you're using an interpreter. And if you are using an interpreter, you should look at the deaf person when you're speaking to them, even though the deaf person will be looking at the interpreter as well as you. They'll scan back and forth. That way they can see the interpreter for the message, but you should be looking at the deaf person and not at the interpreter. Um, and clarification might happen, but the important thing is that you are maintaining eye contact with the deaf person and not looking at the interpreter. That's very important for communication. And again, that is goes along with social cues, and it's something to you should definitely consider when you're interacting with a deaf person. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about that concept of tapping shoulders. So some deaf people are okay with being touched and some do not like it. Some prefer you going into their line of sight closer to them. That way they know you're trying to get their attention. Some prefer you flickering the lights to get their attention. Some don't mind if you tap the table to get their attention. Some prefer to just communicate via text or email. So it's important when you're at work that you ask the deaf person what their communication preferences are and how you should get their attention in the workplace. If you need to have a discussion. So it's important to talk about and find out what their preferences are. Some deaf people are fine with any mode of communication and you can tap them. Some prefer you to go up and give them a hug. So a lot of deaf people do enjoy touch. But again, at the workplace, you have to think about those social etiquette and boundaries as well. So it's something to discuss with your deaf colleagues. Next slide, please. So this is just going to show you some basic ASL signs. And you should hopefully maybe know some of these signs already. This might be also a good time for you to learn it today. And then you can show your deaf employees and deaf colleagues what you've learned. So it's a very short video I'm going to show you, and it's just going to show you a handful of signs. It's not going to go through the alphabet, but it is going to show you just basic signs that you should know. And so this is a good exposure for you today. And so now I'm going to show you the video if you'd like to learn the signs. So as you can see, this is how she's doing help. Help. You raise your hand. So this is how you show directionality. Help. I'm helping you. I'm helping you. And then go this way, bring it into yourself to say, help me. Stop like this. So you start with your non-dominant hand, and your dominant hand does the motion. Please. So flat palm, please. And make so you can either use the thumb at the side or the thumb on the hand to show sorry. Make sure you make the facial expression. You show it bathroom like this. Then if you're not sure, you make the face if you're asking where the bathroom is. So ready? Help. Stop. Please. It looks like our video might have froze. Did it freeze, Diamond? There it is. And then there's sorry. Then thank you. And bathroom. Amazing. All right, we're going to stop that video. There's more examples in the video. So we'll just stop there. If you'd like, you can watch more of these videos later on and learn some more signs. Okay. Thank you, Diamond. You can go to the next slide. This is just a funny little comic, little deaf joke, little comic strip here. It's by a comic writer called That Deaf Guy by Matt and Kay Daigle. So the hearing person says, "Do you miss being able to hear?" to the deaf person. The deaf person writes back and says, "No, do you miss being deaf?" Then the hearing person scratches their head and says, "Well, I've never been deaf." And they're like, "Oh, I get it." Just a funny little cartoon. All right, next slide. So this is more about if you have a deaf colleague or deaf employee you work with, and it's more about just being willing to get to know the person and find out the best way to communicate with them, their preferences, etc., and just to share in that experience. Share what you already know, or share that you might not know much, and that's totally fine as well. It's all about making that connection with the deaf person. Oftentimes, the deaf person will show by modeling, or they might just explain their preferences for communication. And later on, you can talk about, best practices, of how you can incorporate deaf culture into your office. Maybe you can do a monthly ASL lesson. Maybe you can do signs of the month. It's different ways to approach that. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Q&A session. Begin that. So does anybody have any questions for me? Anything you'd like to discuss about the presentation or anything you'd like to share, any stories? We're going to go ahead and close the PowerPoint and then also switch interpreters. Do you want to voice and I'll sign the questions, or do you want to
Sure.
just?
Sorry. All right. If there's, oh, we have questions in the chat. Okay. Yep. Tatum said, yep, this is very helpful. Thank you so much for presenting. You're welcome. All right. Tatum, you're welcome to ask any questions. If you want to have any questions you'd like to ask for about deaf people.
Oh, hi. I don't know.
No.
I just, maybe just on a personal note, what's your personal favorite thing about deaf culture?
Okay. All right. Like your question, it's hard to pick one thing as who I am, right? I would say um, not everyone being deaf at my like in my world and being in my world being having like the deaf. So I go outside. I have to be more attentive, right? And so I know not all people sign, but when I'm home in my deaf world, and I have that comfort and knowledge and have language access and be able to really communicate, um, and where we have cameras where it's I can see what's going on. It's very visual and deaf friendly. To me, it's accessible. And so my favorite thing, which I would say, just using sign language and storytelling. And yeah, we often like to exaggerate like you can like do like a short story, but often sometimes we'll do like some exaggerations with like facial expressions to do the storytelling, and that really helps the other person connect with it, and you kind of feel like yeah, like you are really understanding what's going on in the story and you're part of it. And growing up I was involved in a road show. And so like that would be like performances, programs. We would tour. We went to Japan, Senegal, like exchange students with cultures. And we would have exchanges, and we would meet other deaf people, like in Japan, or deaf people there, in Africa, different countries. And what we would do then is we would exchange, right, through dance and performing. And in our performances would include signs, right, and gestures, and we follow the music, the dance, and it was very expressive in our that. And it was a not like a word for word thing, but it was just more of like expression. No, like English or no, subtext or anything. It's just expressive dance, and I like that concept. But yeah, thank you for your question, Tatum.
Thank you.
Did you see something new? Did you learn something new today that you weren't aware about in deaf culture in the presentation? One thing you'd stand out to you that had impact?
I think it was helpful to see the actual definitions because I've heard a lot of the concepts in the work that I do with our EDI council, but I've not experienced it firsthand with definitions. So I think all of that was helpful. And also the information on how it's not, one size fits all for everyone. It's important to talk to each person that you're speaking with in the deaf community so that you know what their preference is for getting their attention and all of that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy to do that. And again, yes, this video will be available and shared and posted so you can watch it later. You can share it with your other employees as well. Okay, I see in the chat Dr. Paige Bradford posted. Can you share about the importance of using big D def instead of little d def? Hmm. I do like the question because capital D, big D def, when we're talking about a deaf person, right, it's their identity. If we're talking about, their values in deaf culture, that's what we're talking about. That's referred to capital deaf, big D def. Um, like if we're typing work about deaf identity and being deaf culture, deaf blind, deaf and hard of hearing, we respect that that's their culture, that's their identity. And that includes deaf blind. We say, deaf B is the capital B then for blind as well. So capital D, capital B. Include hard of hearing as well, if that's your preference. And just everyday language, we're referring to deafness. Sometimes that helps to remember, to be reminders that when we use the term as a block, just like a regular referring to like black people, right? You do a capital B for black, right? Is that helpful? All right. Yep, hopefully that's helped. If not, I can answer any other questions offline for clarification. All right. Next one we have from Y Dockery in the chat. Yes. Thank you for confirming that we should ensure we are making eye contact and use facial expressions. You're welcome. Next one in the chat, Renee. Question is, are there any visual cues that might indicate if someone is hard of hearing or deaf? I'm hoping to learn how to better recognize these signs, visual cues. Um, it could be like it's invisible disability. It's a hidden disability in some ways. So that's why people who identify as a black person first, once you see them, right? That's the visual recognition. But I would say, like you were mentioning, you could see some visual cues of a deaf person and catch up, and catch that. Often, I would say where they're looking, right? Their eye contact. their body language. I do notice with some deaf who are able to see, you'll see like a more enhanced analysis of the situation, taking in the surroundings, or a deaf person, being quieter and other than people in a situation, like why are they not, speaking? And so it's just really the idea is that they're not catching the auditory information, right? They're not relying on that. So that's something unique to them and how they're interacting. Really just pay attention to their behavior cues and, their environment, what's going on. How are they responding? If it's just you and them and you notice something is not that, like, okay. Um, Sometimes, like when we're in like public ordering food, I'll tend to just use my phone. Yep, just type it out, have my order ready on the phone, and then when I want to order, like I said, I have it all typed out on my phone, and like in a note app or a messenger or whatever, something that I can type out a message, showing it on my phone, um, and then just show it to them. Or sometimes, if I'm ready, I can just point to the menu or to what's going on. And often the person who's the cashier or taking my order will try to say, "Oh no, I signed," or "What do you want me to order and sign?" So that's interesting to take a look at them to see, how the voice is different and if they know sign language or not, based on how I interact with them and be able to make that connection together, going back and forth. Um, and sometimes like it's just hard though that the deaf accent, they call it. And so not everyone understands that and not it's not all the same as well. So I would just say there's some behavior cues that you can recognize. Um, and yeah, so versus what like hearing people do versus what deaf people do. And I would say hearing people think, pointing is rude, right? We were all taught that growing up. That people say, no, it's fine. It's important to point, to describe, to, get an understanding what you're talking about. Hearing people say, eye contact you don't need. Deaf people say, no, I need eye contact. I need to make sure that we're connecting. It's important to have the eye contact and to make sure we're in this together. So yeah, those are a couple things, as well as like hearing people say it's rude to talk with your mouth full, right? And Deaf's like, no, it's fine. We can eat and chat and talk. While I'm eating, it's fine. I'm using sign language to communicate. Hearing people, have like a short goodbye. Deaf people have a longer goodbye. It's one of those where we just you want to keep talking and then we draw that out our goodbyes. Hearing do short introductions as well. Deaf people, we have longer introductions. We want to know about them. How we connect with each other as deaf people. Hearing people, I'd say more of a, you know, subtle, not as direct, and deaf people are more blunt and straight with you. No filter, right? As they say. So yeah, and when we're doing introductions, we talk about this. We got a couple minutes left before meetings here. One important thing I want to do, I wanted to make sure that everyone here understands when we're meeting, all the staff and educators here. One of them did talk about wanting to get a summary of the introducing myself, and I said, sure. That's what we have the interpreter here. That the interpreter, is here to communicate to make sure we have that. But just to get that beforehand and to introduce like who they are and everything. So I was like, all right, I'll sign and do my introduction for myself. And like 5 minutes or 10 minutes are left, but it's a longer introduction for deaf people. And the person's like, oh, well, that's going on. I said, what's wrong? And they're just like, nope, they hung it up, and it's just like, wow, like the interpreter, what's going on? Like it's like, what words did you use? And they said it was 60 seconds is what you're supposed to do, just 60 seconds introduction. And that was the key word was 60 seconds, right? Because that's what the hearing person wanted. So sometimes, with the deaf people, you got to be like we're relying on interpreters. It takes more time to go back and forth or captioning to read what's going on. And so there is that understanding, to be aware of what is different between hearing culture and deaf culture and the etiquettes, right? And what's expected in the norms. But thank you so much for watching. And if no more questions, I want to thank you all for participating and joining today. Thank you to the two interpreters as well. And any last questions? You're welcome. All right. Yep. Take care. All right. I'll post all this video online and all the resources in PowerPoint as well. So if you're interested, you can watch again or share with your other colleagues. All right. Thank you, interpreters, again. Thank you, Convo, for your support today. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Thank you for watching. Yep. Thank you, Diamond. All right, you can hang up. Close the meeting.